All right, welcome everyone. Please welcome author and champion rower Jack Carlson, here to discuss the revised and expanded edition of Rowing Blazers. Jack also founded the lifestyle brand Rowing Blazers. It is a new Americana brand stemming from rowing culture, known for its whimsical take on the prep aesthetic. However, we are here to discuss Rowing Blazers, the book. It is a homage to all things rowing, featuring clubs, campuses, boathouses, and team rooms in the full spectrum of color. Thank you for coming out tonight and enjoy the event.
All right. Thank you. Hello, good evening. Thank you all. My name is Miles Fisher, and I am fortunate to be a good and longtime friend of Jack, of Dr. John Lawrence Carlson, PhD. Just quickly before we start, it's not only is it really, really good food, it's literally Jack's favorite diet. It's just grilled cheese and fries. Grab whatever you want, and we're gonna do a little Q&A, and I'll figure out how this works. I'll just grab it. So if I could just start, I'm gonna ask Jack a number of questions about the book and about how he got here. Jack doesn't know I'm doing this, but just as a little bit of context, this Rowing Blazers that I'm wearing that he will describe, Jack made it for a club we belong to in New York. In fact, I sponsored Jack for membership of this club. And so I was going through my old letter of recommendation, and I just wanted to read an excerpt to explain a little bit about Jack. Jack is an immensely talented fellow with an unusually colorful area of expertise and accomplishments. He is a 3-time member of the U.S. national rowing team. He's an accomplished archaeologist, specializing in the Roman Principate and the contemporaneous Qin Han Empire in China. As an Oxford and Georgetown man, Dr. Carlson also has published original pieces in august periodicals, such as Foreign Policy. Not being limited to simply a brain and jock, Jack is a flourishing entrepreneur, having built an impressive business from his sartorial bona fides. It wouldn't be a stretch to say that my friend Jack is an Indiana Jones 2.0. Now, to be fair, he is a subpar backgammon player, and he really can't carry much of a tune as a singer. But he's awfully good company and a real character with character. The letter goes on. I won't indulge you more. Jack, realistically, you and I bonded kind of initially over clothes in our love for them as storytellers. As clothes are rooted in history and the craft that they listed. What first interested you in the history of items? You are an archaeologist. You are literally a sartorial doctor. What are kind of your earliest memories of finding passion in the things we wear and what they say about us?
Wow, that was quite the intro. I'm speechless after that. I don't know what to say. But I can say that being an archaeologist is not like Indiana Jones in real life, sadly. Everybody who becomes an archaeologist from my generation and probably many generations on either side just watched too much Indiana Jones as a kid, and then you get there and it's not like that at all. You're not chasing Nazis, you're not having huge boulders rolling past you, you're brushing dirt in a field somewhere, basically. And that was a lot of my experience as an archaeologist. But you're right, archaeology is the study of things that are made by humans and human culture and material culture, and clothing is part of that. A lot of people thought when I came out with the first edition of the Rowing Blazers book that was my PhD thesis. And that's for real. I wish it was. That was like a side project, and my thesis was about Roman and Chinese archaeology. But there is a common thread, I think, because old clothes, whether it's a blazer or it's an old band t-shirt or it's royal cape that was worn hundreds of years ago, these things are artifacts and they're archaeology. And I guess I have always been very interested in clothes. My dad, who's here tonight, shout out to my dad. noticed this, and it got me a copy of the book Dressing the Man by Alan Flusser, which is, I think that's like everyone's menswear 101. If anyone's interested and hasn't read it, that's a great place to start. And that was probably when I was in high school, and that's what got me started.
Major props to your dad for giving you Alan Flusser's classic tome. So, so we are here to discuss a book that is for purchase later on, closing by 8 o'clock at Diesel. Randall has a copy. If you can just hold it up. So this is the 10th anniversary. The book was originally published in 2014. Tell us initially the impetus of the book. Obviously, you were a world-class rower and a coxswain, but did you have in mind, did it start with a book in mind, or started kind of as a pictorial essay, right?
A coxswain, yes. We have to clarify. I was a coxswain. In the intro, it said I'm a champion rower. I was definitely a coxswain. I did a little bit of rowing at a much, much lower level than I did, than I was a coxswain. For anyone who doesn't know, in the sport of rowing, you have 8 rowers in the boat, sweating, working their something off, and then you have one little guy screaming and making the calls. I'm biased, so I would describe it as it's like the quarterback of the rowing team. And I did talk to Peyton Manning last year, and I didn't know if he'd know anything about rowing. He knew all about it. He knew what the coxswain was, and he was like, yeah, it's the quarterback of the team. And if he says it, I'm going with it. But really, it's a little guy who makes all the calls. And this was many, many pounds ago that I was the coxswain. But I started when I was 11 or 12 years old in the sport. And I was recruited by my friends who were like, you'd be a good coxswain. And little did I know, because I didn't know anything about the sport, that just meant you're kind of little and have a big mouth. And that's how I began. And I was fortunate enough to go race at a big event in England called Henley Royal Regatta, which is kind of like Wimbledon of rowing. It's very, very traditional. It's very British, and everyone wears blazers like this at the event. And we got knocked out in the first round. It's a big bracket, just like Wimbledon. If you lose once, you're out, and we got knocked out in the very first round. And it gave me a burning desire to go back and win one day, which I did 9 years later, 9 years of trying. But it also gave me a lot of time to chat with all these other rowers and everyone else who was spectating. And I met other high school rowers and college rowers and all these people from all over the world, and got to hear the story of their blazers. And you meet these Dutch guys that have like a sleeve missing from their blazer. Or you meet these British guys that have blazers that are made out of the old curtains cut down from their school's dining hall. And they all have these really quirky stories and myths and rituals behind them. And I thought, I was probably 15 years old or something, and I thought someone should do a book about this. And I decided 7 years later, okay, I'm going to do the book about this. But I thought it was going to be very, very niche, really just for the rowing community. I had no thought then of like, oh, I'm going to start a brand called Rowing Blazers one day, and it's going to be this whole thing. I just thought this will be a fun little project to work on for the rowing community, basically.
I've heard you say, contemporizing the blazer for today's audience, it's the original hoodie. And then, for a slightly older generation, it is the original varsity letter jacket, varsity letter sweater. And so there is a lot of pride. And then in addition to that, the hoodie makes sense. It keeps you warm. You put it over. You got the marsupial pouch pocket. You got pocket, interior pocket. How have you found that has maintained true and is in 2024, are rowing blazers just as relevant as they were even when you were in college?
Well, the brand has made the blazer in the sport of rowing, the blazer tradition, probably like more prominent and more relevant than ever in the sport. And so that's a big part of what the new edition of the book is all about. There are all these rowing clubs that some of them have existed for 100 years or more. University of Washington, which if anybody saw the movie The Boys in the Boat, it's all about the rowing team at the University of Washington. It's a very historic rowing team in the U.S., but they never had a blazer as part of their club or their team tradition until just a few years ago. And we made it with Rowing Blazers, the company. And the book has really, I think, driven kind of a renaissance in this tradition. But what a lot of people, I think, don't realize just in the world in general is that the blazer comes from the sport of rowing. So pretty much everyone, I think, regardless of how old you are, who you are, whether you're a guy or a girl or where you come from, has a blazer in their closet of some description. And the blazer actually started as like a warm-up jacket for rowers at Cambridge and Oxford. And even the word blazer comes from rowing as well. And this was something I sort of discovered in working on the book. And before the first edition came out anyway, if you looked up where does the word blazer come from, there was this story that you would always hear that it comes from the Royal Navy in the 1890s had a ship called the HMS Blazer. And the captain wanted all his men to wear matching blue jackets, and they got nicknamed Blazers. And it sounds right. It's kind of, I think stuck around for a while because it kind of sounds like, oh, that makes sense. But in reality, it comes from a rowing jacket worn by a particular college, a particular club at Cambridge in the 1850s, 40 years earlier, that was blazing red, and it was nicknamed the Blazer. And there was something else called a bluer, and that's really where the word comes from. So this thing that we all own, and it's basically navy blue for most people, it comes from a bright red jacket that was worn by one specific rowing club in the 1850s, and it kind of has expanded and took over the world from there.
Today one of the hottest classic moves of expanding your audience in retail is doing collaborations. You've done that incredibly effectively and creatively for a long time now. But it dawns on me that kind of the original collaborations, of course, were with schools. You manufactured for schools, you manufactured for clubs, you built up a base because, they make our jackets, etc. So this past Sunday in the New York Times Style section was a big piece on this company, Gift Shop, that was opened in 2023. Yeah, and of course, it's a Parisian version, but they're going to local restaurants and they're making dad hats and whatnot. I couldn't get two paragraphs in between. Yeah, Jack Carlson did that first and he did it better. So talk us initially early on how you kind of started working with various brands. I remember, for example, the Harry's American Bar in Paris was probably one of the early ones.
It was, yeah. And I was thinking about that myself, of course, reading that article, because they were like, they're doing basically merch with Brasserie Lippe and all these other Parisian institutions. And I was like, that sounds familiar. But you're right. I mean, I never had the idea, actually, of starting a clothing brand, when I was working on the book initially. It was really just a passion project. And what really made it take off, I give a lot of credit to a guy named Jerry Lauren, who's Ralph Lauren's older brother, and he's the head of menswear at Ralph Lauren. And Jerry Lauren called me completely out of the blue, probably 2 months before the book came out, and my publisher had sent him a copy of the book, or sent it to the Ralph Lauren offices, and it ended up on his desk. And he said, "My name's Jerry Lauren, I'm Ralph Lauren's brother, and is this your book?" And I was 25 and I was living in England and I was on my bike, I remember when he called, and I didn't even think it was real at first, but it was real. And I flew to New York, I met Jerry, I met Ralph Lauren, and they ended up hosting this series of parties for the book, and it really took the book to the next level. And it went from being this niche thing for the rowing community to it was this menswear phenomenon. And this was, of course, in the sort of hashtag menswear days, and this was in a sort of a different era of men's fashion. And that is what really inspired me to start the brand. And I had this idea of starting a brand sort of in the vein of Ralph Lauren, but doing a lot of collaborations, taking some of the philosophies more commonly at that time associated with streetwear, so doing limited edition product, doing a lot of collaborations, and that's how it began. And I remember sitting with my co-founder, a guy named David Rosenzweig, and writing on a napkin. This is like a year before we started the brand. okay, we want to do collaborations. Who should we collaborate with? And we wrote down Seiko. It'd be cool to do watches with Seiko, but we should do wax jackets with Barber. And let's do more let's put more watches on there. Who else would you want? Tag Heuer, Tudor. We should do something with J Press. We should do Wellington boots with Hunter. And it's so crazy to me how many of
Was
those
Gucci
things,
on that original list?
we didn't even dare to dream about Gucci or Target.
Or Target?
Or Target. But like, we're just two guys sitting there. We didn't have a brand. We didn't have a website. We didn't have anything. And it's also so crazy to me how many of those collaborations, they approached us. It's not like we had this list and it's like, okay, let's go down the list and find someone who works there and whatever. And a lot of them happened like much, I don't know, sort of sooner than we would think. You know, we're in maybe year 2 and it's like someone from Barber just walked into our pop-up shop and said they want to collaborate. It was, I don't know.
Walk us
just
through
so
kind of how
crazy.
that works insofar as where do you start? Because all collaborations are different. And, you know, it's 1 + 1 = 3 when it works right. It's part of your DNA. It's part of them. But you're talking Barber. You're talking brands with 100 years plus of legacy already. So initially, what is kind of the opening salvo from Rowing Blazers insofar as here's what we bring to the table?
Well, I think being an archaeologist, it's looking at their history, it's looking through their archive. Sometimes it's physically digging through their archive of old product that they have. And it's finding those hidden gems that are so nostalgic in some cases, are so powerful or seem so cool or different or avant-garde today, but they're in some ways very old, or in sometimes very old, and they're coming out of this brand's archive, and you're kind of finding these cool things from the past that they've been sitting on without even realizing it in a way. And I don't blame them for that. I think sometimes you have to kind of be an outsider to come in and say, like, go into Sperry and be like, okay, I know you guys are all into this version of the boat shoe that you're doing, but I just spent 4 hours in your basement and like, what the heck is this? And they're like, oh yeah, that's like this sneaker that Ted Kennedy wore in like 1989 or something. We actually have a photo of it somewhere. And you're like, wait, this thing would be sick today. But they don't think that way. And it takes sometimes an outsider to show them that. That's how I kind of go about it.
Do you have a do you like to do things in kind of an LTO limited time like offering initially? Do you try to create rarity? Are you already thinking in terms of, you know, I've got 4 collections every single year I have to put out? Like, what is kind of the annual pacing, both of collaborations and the main line of Rowing Blazers?
So that's a great question and something that no one ever asks. But it's very interesting. For me, as a designer, my least favorite thing is what's the new season? What's the new season in the main line? My favorite things are the two opposite ends of the spectrum, where it's like, what's evergreen? What's like just the perfect rugby shirt that we can just have every season and every year? And it's like, we've perfected it. It's made in exactly the right way, in exactly the right place. And we can just do that forever. Like, maybe you're changing the colors. But even then, I'm not like, what's the palette for spring? It's like, this color would be cool. But you basically are just doing variations on that evergreen core product. And I love that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, of course, I love those limited edition things where it's like, let's do this watch. We know we're only making whatever it is. It could be 100 of them. It could be 888 of them. Shout out to Randall, who modeled for us for one of our watch collabs. Thank you for being here. Those are the things that excite me the most, because on the one end, it's like, it's just the perfect example of whatever that category is. And then on the other end, it's something super exciting that is made even more exciting by the fact that it's not going to be here forever. And it's maybe only going to be around for a few minutes, and you have to be there at the time to get it. There's something very special about that. The stuff in the middle, which is much more of what most of the fashion industry is about, is the thing that excites me the least, actually.
Talk to us a little bit how you think about spaces and kind of tangible in-person activation. So here we are, Brentwood Country Mart. This really is one of the absolute gems of West Los Angeles. Has real soul and spirit. You guys, you started with clubs. You built a clubhouse, essentially, that was your store in New York. It's incredible. It has heart and soul. It doesn't feel two-dimensional. But you also, nobody does a mood board like Jack Carlson. You do playlists. Tell me kind of how you think about continuing Rowing Blazers over the next decade with, experiences that are walk-in, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, our pop-up here at Brentwood Country Mart was very, very special. We took over the post office. It's very tiny, if anybody's ever been in there, but that was part of the fun. That was part of the challenge. And actually, I love tiny shops. That made me really fall in love with tiny shops. If you have room to create something cool and just enough room, that's kind of all you need. And one of my philosophies is, of course, you're doing business out of the shop, but it's also like a billboard, or it's also like your embassy, or kind of planting your flag in a new territory. And we've done pop-ups in Tokyo, in Nantucket, in Paris, in London, in LA, of course, in New York, and in Brooklyn. And I think they're a very important part of kind of building community. Of course, it's one thing to have an Instagram following, and you're right, we do other things like, it's a little bit dormant these days, but in the early days, we had like the mood board Instagram account for people who wanted like the deeper cut. And having your physical sort of embassy in these different places, even if it's just a pop-up or just for a moment, I think is part of that. And I think it makes it something that people can connect to much more than just seeing something online.
What do you think the world of retail is craving right now?
It's
from a consumer point of view and a producer point of view.
It's one of the most overused words in the industry, so it almost has lost all meaning. But I think authenticity, and I hate actually even saying that word, because every brand, the most like fake brands that you can possibly find, you probably have brands that are like just exclusively selling through Alibaba, and they're like, authenticity is part of our charm. But if you can have real authenticity, to use kind of a I don't know, whatever figure of speech that would be, if you can have real authenticity, that's the most powerful thing ever. And I think that's what informs a lot of what we do at Rowing Blazers. That's why we started by making blazers for the rowing teams at Harvard and Georgetown and Cambridge, and the US team and the German team and the British team. It's like we didn't just put the name of a sport in our name of our brand. It's like, well, the founder has a huge history in that sport, and the brand is very engaged in that sport. And that's why we do every collaboration that we do too. It's like, I love Harry's Bar, and I love their logo of the little dancing barflies, which the bar started in 1911, I think, and the barflies came just a few years after that. But I don't look at that and go, oh, we should do our own little dancing insects, and let's put Jack's Bar and like sell merch of that, which in some ways would be a lot easier. It's like, you have to email with Harry's Bar. You might have to fly over there again. You have to sign agreements. You have to get lawyers involved, all of this stuff. But that's part of the magic. I mean, that's part of what the New York Times article about Gift Shop was talking about too. It's like, that's part of the magic. People love to connect with these institutions. That's also the magic of doing a wax cotton jacket with Barber instead of just doing it yourself. And that's authenticity.
We're going to wrap this up shortly because the bookstore is only open till 8. By all means, stick around. So just a few more short questions. You have you built a very successful, not just brand, but a following. You've built a real audience. You've also successfully, the brand itself has been acquired. It got a major capital infusion. You're still very hands-on, and you've acquired other legacy brands. My question is, you've seen some things, you've grown a lot. What is the Jack Carlson, what's one thing that Jack Carlson knows now that the Jack Carlson of 7 years ago would have been like, hey, that would have really been great to have known 7 years ago?
That's a really, really tough one. That's a really tough question because the list is endless. I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was getting myself into in starting a brand. I had no idea what I was getting myself into in writing the book, actually, in the first place. I'll just say quickly about the book. I finished the book, or got 95% of the way through, and realized I have no idea how to get a book published. And this was like 4 years of work, not full-time, but in my spare time. And I emailed about 40 or 50 agents, and not a single one wrote back. And I was super depressed for like 3 months and thought, okay, I might just have to turn this into a blog or something. Like my dream of doing this as a book just might not happen. And one day, as a Hail Mary, I just cold emailed like 3 or 4 different publishers. And I just assumed this is going straight into the trash folder. I'm emailing like hello@rizzoli.com, inquiries@abrams.com. And to my amazement, all of them wrote back within 24 hours. And this is after I had just squandered 3 months waiting for any agent to get back to me. And it was kind of similar starting the brand. I actually had no idea what I was doing at all. I had friends telling me, don't do this. When we started the brand 8 years ago, it was at the peak of fashion was like a Vetements hoodie that just has the unaltered DHL logo on it, and the hood is on the front. And people were like, preppy is not happening. This is not going anywhere. You need to, for your own self-interest, not start this brand. And
Tell that to Ralph Lauren's brother.
I kind of tried to explain, it's not going to be like Vineyard Vines, but people couldn't really get it until they saw it. But I truly didn't know what I was getting myself into. And I guess the biggest thing that I would just say, I don't know that there's too much that I could really advise, but I could just forewarn my past self of the chaos that was going to be involved. And you think you have a plan, you think you have, your roadmap of products that you want to do, and then you find yourself on a daily basis. It's like, oh, they just changed the tariff code on Italian corduroy. Like, you've got to get down to JFK and, like, figure this out and get this, or the collection's not going to be delivered on time. And there's something that weird out of the blue on just an almost daily basis. And the only time that that's really let up after 8 years is literally like when I sold the company earlier this year. Right up until then, all through the pandemic, right up until, the beginning of this year, every day was just full of some kind of blow up like that. And I've kind of, gotten used to it, but it was definitely not something I was anticipating.
So, plenty of time to ask Jack in person. We'll all kind of mingle in the bookstore and out here. Thank you all for coming and being here. Last question. Outside of Rowing Blazers, everybody here is a fan of yours, fan of the brand. What is one brand that you think everybody should learn and research the history of?
Ooh. I think there are 2 brands that I really studied in starting Rowing Blazers, and they're pretty obvious, so forgive me. But that's Ralph Lauren and Supreme. And they're very, very different brands, and they have very, very different histories. They're not super old. I mean, they were both started in the second half of the 20th century. But they were the 2 biggest inspirations for Rowing Blazers, and they couldn't be more different from each other. And there are great books about both of them. There are great books. There are a couple of sort of coffee table books about Supreme. There are also a couple of great books called Supreme Copies, Volume 1 and Volume 2, that I definitely recommend. And of course, there are great books, many great books about Ralph Lauren. that's probably my 2 cents.
And ultimate, last year, is there another book in the works from Dr. Jack Carlson?
I'm working on a book right now. It's about rugby shirts, actually. Its working title is The Lover's Guide to Rugby Shirts. It's a little different from Rowing Blazers. It's not like people wearing the rugby shirts. But I've been, in my free time, going to various collectors and museums around the world. Just fairly recently, I was in Italy at a museum in a place called Artena, outside of Rome. It's about an hour and a half outside of Rome, and it's like on top of a mountain. And it has an incredible, maybe the most incredible collection of rugby shirts in the world, outside of the one place I still have to go, which is in South Africa. But that's the new project.
Can't wait. Jack Carlson.
Thanks, Miles. Thank you.